1:44 a.m. The Gulf of Aden, 12 degrees north latitude, 46 degrees east longitude. The dhow had been on the U.S. Navy's surveillance list for 11 days. Its transponder identified it as a fishing vessel registered in Djibouti. Its movement pattern: slow transits across shipping lanes, periodic stops at coordinates that corresponded to no known fishing ground, an AIS signal that had gone dark for 9 hours on day 4 before reappearing with a position offset that suggested the transponder had been manually reset, had placed it in the Category 2 monitoring classification. Not confirmed hostile. Not cleared. Watched. At 1:44 a.m., the dhow's rear deck covering was removed by a crew that had been below decks since the vessel's last confirmed port call 6 days earlier. Beneath the covering, 4 dhow al-Fiqar medium-range ballistic missiles on compact mobile launchers, a weapons system developed and transferred to Houthi forces in Yemen through a logistics chain that 14 months of U.S. and coalition interdiction effort had not fully severed. The dhow al-Fiqar had a range of 1,400 kilometers. From a launch position in the Gulf of Aden, its engagement envelope covered the entire northern Indian Ocean approach, the Gulf of Oman, and, at maximum range, the Strait of Hormuz itself. The first missile ignited at 1:44 a.m. The second followed at 1:46 a.m. The third and fourth at 1:48 a.m. Simultaneously, at 6 separate locations across the Yemeni coastal region between Udeid and Ras Isa, Houthi forces activated pre-positioned Quds-3 cruise missiles, a terrain-following low-altitude system derived from Iranian Soumar technology, with a range exceeding 1,500 kilometers. 14 Quds-3 missiles were launched within a 9-minute window, routing at altitudes between 50 and 150 meters across the Red Sea approach and the Gulf of Aden, aimed at 2 targets: the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group operating in the northern Arabian Sea, and Naval Support Activity Bahrain, the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters and the operational nerve center for the entire Central Command maritime region. The Bahrain target package carried a specific operational logic. NSA Bahrain is not a hardened military installation in the conventional sense. It occupies 100 acres on the northeastern coast of Bahrain Island, accessible from the sea, with perimeter defense architecture designed for force protection against ground threats and small boat approaches, rather than for defense against a sustained ballistic and cruise missile salvo. Its command facilities, the 5th Fleet Operations Center, and the communications infrastructure that connected Central Command's maritime component to every naval asset between Suez and the Strait of Malacca were all concentrated within that 100-acre footprint. The Houthi planners, with IRGC advisors embedded in their targeting cells since 2022, had identified NSA Bahrain as the single highest value target accessible to their available systems. Removing it from the operational picture would sever the command architecture that coordinated the carrier group's integration with theater-wide operations. A carrier without its command network was still a formidable offensive platform. It was no longer a coordinated element of a unified theater response. At 1:53 a.m., a second phase activated simultaneously from inside Iran itself, from launch positions in the Zagros mountain region and the coastal complexes at Jask and Bandar Abbas. The IRGC Aerospace Force added its contribution to the combined strike. 47 Noor and Ghader anti-ship missiles targeting the Eisenhower Group's operating position, 28 Soumar ground-launched cruise missiles routing toward the same Bahrain target, set as the Houthi Quds-3 package, and 31 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles aimed at Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar and Camp Az-Sailiya, the Army's forward headquarters and pre-positioned equipment storage complex in Qatar. The combined package: 4 dhow al-Fiqar ballistic missiles from the dhow, 14 Quds, 3 cruise missiles from the Yemeni coast, 47 Noor and Ghader anti-ship missiles from Iranian coastal positions, 28 Soumar cruise missiles from Iranian inland sites, 31 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles from the Zagros complex. Total: 124 weapons in flight across 3 geographic origins against 4 target sets, coordinated through a command architecture rehearsed 12 times over the preceding 22 months. This was the Arabian Sea Combined Threat Package, a multi-vector, multi-origin strike that maximized geometric complexity facing the defensive network. The theoretical advantage was forcing simultaneous management of threats arriving from different azimuths at different altitudes, using different guidance systems, against targets spread across a 1,400-kilometer footprint. The network had been specifically designed for exactly this geometry. 1:44 a.m. USS Bataan. Amphibious Ready Group Flagship, Red Sea. The AN/TPY-2 radar system, mounted at the forward monitoring position on the Bataan's superstructure, had been tracking the dhow since 9:47 a.m. the previous day, as part of the continuous maritime surveillance picture maintained by the ARG's intelligence cell. When the dhow's rear deck covering was removed and the first missile ignited, the radar's threat classification algorithm flagged the event in 0.4 seconds. The ship's combat systems officer received the alert at 1:44 a.m., before the first dhow al-Fiqar had cleared its launch rail. The notification reached 5th Fleet Operations Center in Bahrain, CENTCOM, and the Eisenhower Flag Bridge simultaneously. The Eisenhower Group had been under heightened threat status for 7 days, following intercepts of IRGC communications, indicating coordination activity between Iranian Aerospace Force command nodes and Houthi fires planning cells. The group's 4 Aegis escorts had been in full active sensor mode since 1:31 a.m., when a P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft had reported unusual electromagnetic activity from the Yemeni coastal region, consistent with missile launcher pre-launch power-up sequences. The defensive network was already generating targeting solutions when the first weapons cleared their launch positions. The dhow al-Fiqar ballistic missiles from the dhow were the initial intercept priority, not because their warheads were larger than the cruise missiles in the package, but because their trajectory analysis pointed toward NSA Bahrain with the highest confidence. An SM-3 Block 2A from USS Gravely, positioned for maximum intercept geometry in the central Red Sea, was fired at 1:49 a.m. against the leading dhow al-Fiqar track. The intercept was achieved at 1:52 a.m. at 110 kilometers altitude. The second track was engaged by a second SM-3 from USS Mason. The third track required a joint engagement. 2 ships, 1 track, 1 interceptor from each, fired in a staggered sequence to account for the possibility of first-round miss. The third dhow al-Fiqar was neutralized by the first interceptor. The fourth was neutralized by an SM-3 from USS Cole at 1:54 a.m. 4 ballistic missiles launched. 4 intercepted. 0 reached their terminal phase. The Quds 3 cruise missile package was the geometrically complex problem. 14 terrain-following missiles routing at 50 to 150 meters altitude across the Red Sea, some approaching Bahrain from the south through the Bab el-Mandeb corridor, others routing across Saudi airspace at altitudes that created potential second- and third-order complications for Saudi air defense coordination. The U.S. had notified Saudi Arabia's Air Defense Command at 1:47 a.m., 3 minutes after first launch detection. The Saudi RSAF radar network was already tracking the cruise missile package from its southern monitoring stations. The E-3 Sentry AWACS orbiting over the central Red Sea was the primary sensor cueing the intercept network against the low-altitude cruise missile tracks. A-18F Super Hornets from the Eisenhower's Air Wing, already airborne on combat air patrol since 11 p.m., maintained continuously during the elevated threat period, were vectored by the AWACS toward the Quds 3 package at 1:48 a.m. Between 1:52 a.m. and 2:06 a.m., the F/A-18F sorties neutralized 9 of the 14 Quds. 3 cruise missiles at ranges between 40 and 110 kilometers from the Bahrain coast. 5 Quds 3 missiles continued toward the NSA Bahrain target, set after passing beyond the F/A-18F intercept envelope. The Patriot PAC-3 battery protecting NSA Bahrain had been in heightened readiness since 1:51 a.m. Its fire control radar had acquired the 5 inbound Quds 3 tracks at approximately 180 kilometers range, close to the edge of its radar's acquisition range for low-altitude cruise missile targets. The battery fired its first interceptors at 1:58 a.m. 3 of the 5 were neutralized by PAC-3 MSE between 2:01 a.m. and 2:03 a.m. 2 reached their terminal phase against NSA Bahrain. The first impacted the installation's eastern vehicle marshalling area at 2:04 a.m., generating a crater and disabling 6 vehicles. The second impacted the pier facility on the installation's northern waterfront at 2:04 a.m., striking a section of pier that was unoccupied at the time of impact. The ships normally berthed at that position had been moved to standoff anchoring positions 48 hours earlier as a precautionary measure under the elevated threat protocol. The pier section was structurally compromised. 3 personnel in the adjacent support building sustained injuries from the concussive effect. NSA Bahrain's command facilities were intact. The 5th Fleet Operations Center was intact. The communications infrastructure was intact. 2 impacts had reached the installation from 14 launched. The 85.7% intercept rate against the Quds. 3 package had not been 100%, but the 2 impacts had hit the installation's periphery, not its operational core. The IRGC Origin anti-ship package, 47 Noor and Ghader missiles, reached the Eisenhower Group's outer defense perimeter at 2:03 a.m. The Eisenhower's 4 Aegis escorts had been generating intercept solutions since 1:54 a.m., when the launch signatures were confirmed from the Jask and Bandar Abbas coastal positions. The SM-6's dual-mode seeker made it the weapon of choice against the Noor and Ghader, subsonic cruise missiles with terminal active radar guidance that the SM-6 could engage at significantly longer range than the ESSM or CRAM. By 2:09 a.m., 38 of the 47 anti-ship missiles had been intercepted at ranges between 45 and 180 kilometers from the carrier. 9 continued past the SM-6 layer. At 2:09 a.m., USS Lady Gulf, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser serving as the group's primary air defense coordinator, had expended 71 of her 122 VLS cells in the preceding 26 minutes across the combined anti-ship and cruise missile intercept queue. She transmitted her threshold status to the group. The remaining SM-6 assignments against the 9 leakers were redistributed across the 3 Arleigh Burke escorts. The redistribution took 3.7 seconds. During those 3.7 seconds, Track 0083, a Ghader anti-ship missile in its terminal sprint phase at Mach 0.9, was momentarily unassigned. It was reassigned to USS Stout and engaged at 22 kilometers range. Intercept probability at that range geometry, 81%. The intercept succeeded. Of the remaining 8 leakers, 6 were engaged and neutralized by ESSM and CRAM at close range. 2 closed to CIWS engagement range. 1 was neutralized by the Eisenhower's own CIWS at 800 meters. The final leaker impacted the port side of USS Laboon, an Arleigh Burke destroyer on the group's southern perimeter, at 2:11 a.m. The Ghader's 165-kilogram warhead detonated against the destroyer's hull below the waterline, flooding 2 engineering compartments. Damage control teams had the flooding contained within 14 minutes. USS Laboon remained underway and combat-capable at reduced speed. Her VLS remained operational. 1 destroyer hit. 46 of 47 anti-ship missiles intercepted. The 31 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles targeting al-Udeid and Camp Az-Sailia were engaged by the Patriot PAC-3 and THAAD network in Qatar and by Aegis BMD ships in the Persian Gulf. The intercept campaign against the Fateh 313 package produced a 90.3% interception rate. 3 missiles impacted the Al-Udeid outer perimeter area, 1 impacting near the runway approach zone without direct runway contact. Camp Az-Sailia received 1 impact in its vehicle storage area. The 28 Soumar cruise missiles routing from Iranian inland positions toward Bahrain were engaged by a combination of F-15 Sea Air Superiority fighters from Al-Udeid, already airborne on alert, the Patriot battery network across Qatar and Bahrain, and the E-3 AWACS providing continuous targeting support. 24 of 28 were intercepted before reaching Bahrain territorial airspace. 4 entered the Bahrain defense perimeter and were engaged by PAC-3 All 4 were neutralized. By 2:19 a.m., all 28 Soumar cruise missiles had been accounted for. At 2:22 a.m., the IRGC executed its reserve. The reserve was not a second ballistic missile salvo. The IRGC planners had anticipated that a ballistic reserve would face the same intercept architecture as the initial package, with only marginal advantage from the reduced defensive magazine capacity at that point in the engagement. Instead, the reserve consisted of 340 Shahed, 136 loitering munitions. The one-way attack drone that had demonstrated in previous regional engagements a capacity to saturate point defense systems through sheer volume at minimal cost. Each Shahed 136 carried a 40-kilogram warhead, cost approximately $20,000 to produce, and flew at 185 kilometers per hour at altitudes between 50 and 500 meters. Against a Patriot battery optimized for ballistic missile intercept, a swarm of 340 low-cost drones presented a targeting efficiency problem that had no clean solution. The PAC-3 MSE interceptor costs $4 million. The Shahed costs $20,000. Expending a $4 million interceptor against a $20,000 drone produced an exchange ratio that was mathematically catastrophic for the Defender's magazine. The 340 Shahed 136S were launched in 4 sequential waves across a 38-minute window, routing at terrain-following altitudes from launch positions in the Iranian coastal zone. Their target set, NSA Bahrain and the Al-Udeid fuel farm. The U.S. and coalition response to the drone swarm was not PAC-3 MSE. The network had anticipated exactly this exchange ratio problem. The response was layered differently for the drone category. F-15C and F/A-18F sorties, assigned specifically to drone intercept duty, using AIM-9X Sidewinder and 20mm cannon for terminal intercept. Mobile high-energy laser systems, the AN/TWQ-1 Avenger batteries modified with directed energy payloads, positioned at NSA Bahrain perimeter positions. CRAM-CIWS batteries covering the installation's approach corridors. Electronic warfare assets providing GPS jamming across the drone swarm's navigation reliance zone. The combined drone intercept architecture achieved an 84% neutralization rate against the 340 Shahed swarm. Of the 340 launched, 286 were intercepted. 54 impacted in or around their target zones. Against NSA Bahrain, 31 Shaheds reached the installation perimeter. 22 impacted in the vehicle compound, fuel point, and equipment storage areas. 9 impacted the pier access road and the eastern maintenance facility. The cumulative effect of 31 warhead impacts across NSA Bahrain's support infrastructure was significant. The fuel point was rendered non-operational. The maintenance facility sustained structural damage. Vehicle losses from the compound impacts numbered 19. 11 personnel sustained injuries, none assessed as life-threatening. The operational facilities, the 5th Fleet Command Center, the communications node, the intelligence fusion cell, remained intact and fully operational. At al-Udeid's fuel farm, 23 Shaheds reached the target area. The fuel farm's CRAM battery had been specifically repositioned to cover this approach vector 11 days earlier. 17 were intercepted by CRAM in the terminal phase. 6 impacted in the fuel farm area, disabling 2 of the facility's 7 fuel storage lines. Al-Udeid's fueling operations were degraded to approximately 71% of normal throughput. Aircraft sorties could continue at reduced sortie generation rate. The IRGC's reserve gambit had achieved what its ballistic and cruise packages had not: sustained physical effect on U.S. installation infrastructure. But the operational core, carrier strike capability, Fifth Fleet Command Authority, al-Udeid's strike generation capacity, had absorbed the swarm and continued functioning. 2:31 a.m. The Combined Air Operations Center, al-Udeid, Operation Sea Lance, had been pre-authorized for immediate activation the moment the first missile cleared any launch position in the combined Houthi-IRGC package. The authorization had not required a separate decision cycle. The decision had been made 11 days earlier when the threat assessment reached confirmation threshold. What 2:31 a.m. required was a targeting queue refresh based on which assets had survived the opening salvo. All carrier strike aircraft were combat effective. The F/A-18F sorties that had engaged the Quds 3 cruise missile package were recovering and rearming. The B-1B Lancers on alert at al-Udeid were armed and ready. 4 Virginia-class submarines pre-positioned in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea had been holding at firing depth since 2:06 a.m. Their Tomahawk targeting packages had been loaded 19 days prior and updated 3 times since. The first Tomahawk launches from the submarine force were confirmed at 2:31 a.m. The initial counterstrike target set was organized around 3 priorities. First, the dhow and any additional maritime launch platforms identified in the Gulf of Aden and Red Sea corridor. A P-8 Poseidon had maintained continuous surveillance of the dhow since the launch. The vessel had not moved after launching its missiles. 2 Harpoon anti-ship missiles from an F/A-18F neutralized the dhow at 2:24 a.m. A second vessel identified as a probable support platform 12 kilometers from the dhow's position was engaged by a Tomahawk at 2:38 a.m. Second, the 6 Yemeni coastal launch sites from which the Quds 3 missiles had originated. All 6 had been tracked and geolocated to within 200 meters by the AWACS sensor picture and signals intelligence during the launch window. JASSM-ER from the B-1B package and Tomahawks from the submarine force reached the first 3 sites at 2:44 a.m. Precision munitions confirmed the remaining 3 sites engaged by 2:59 a.m. Third, the IRGC coastal missile infrastructure at JASSM and Bandar Abbas. 72 Tomahawks allocated to these targets crossed Iranian territorial waters at 2:41 a.m. Each JASSM-ER costs $1.36 million. Each Tomahawk BGM-109E costs $2.1 million. 64 systems were in flight simultaneously against the Iranian coastal target set. The accounting would come later. At 2:41 a.m., the only number that mattered was whether the aim points confirmed on the assessment feed. EO-18G Growlers from the Eisenhower's Air Wing had been providing continuous electronic suppression of Iranian coastal radar networks since 2:08 a.m. AARGM-ER launches against the HQ-2 and S-300 fire control radars protecting the JASSM complex had been executed at 2:12 a.m. By 2:31 a.m., 11 of 14 cataloged SAM fire control radars in the coastal zone had lost emissions. The Tomahawk routing had been planned around the 3 remaining active radars, threading the strike packages through the radar coverage gaps that the Growlers had widened. By minute 47 of the combined engagement, the United States had expended $2.6 billion in interceptors, precision munitions, and operational costs across the theater. The invoice covered 4 separate threat streams, 3 target countries, 6 distinct weapon system categories, and a drone swarm intercept campaign that had no precedent in scale in previous U.S. operational history. At 3:14 a.m., the Shahed 4th wave, the last of the IRGC's drone reserve, was engaged and neutralized before reaching Bahrain airspace by a combination of F-15C sorties and the directed energy systems. The last Shahed impacted harmlessly in open water, 3 kilometers from the NSA Bahrain perimeter at 3:14 a.m. The combined Houthi-IRGC strike package had been fully neutralized. 3:22 a.m. 5th Fleet Operations Center, NSA Bahrain. The Operations Center had not been evacuated during the strike. Personnel had moved to hardened shelter positions within the facility at 1:51 a.m. when the elevated alert was declared. But the Command Watch team had remained at their consoles throughout, tracking the engagement in real time, managing the fleet-wide response, coordinating with CENTCOM and with the ROE authorization chain for the counter-strike packages. The Duty Watch commander, a captain with 22 years of naval service, had processed the status feed for 4 simultaneous engagement tracks across 2.5 hours, while 2 cruise missiles impacted within 400 meters of his building. He had not stepped away from his console. At 3:22 a.m., with the last Shahed wave confirmed neutralized and the counter-strike confirmation feeds populating green across the target assessment board, he authorized the shift from active engagement posture to battle damage assessment mode. He noted the time in the operations log. He did not note anything else. There was nothing else that needed to be noted. The consoles showed what had happened. The database would hold it. The log would confirm the time. Time from first dhow launch detection to completion of all active threat intercepts, 90 minutes. Time from first dhow launch to completion of initial counterstrike against Houthi and IRGC launch infrastructure, 75 minutes. Combined weapons launched against U.S. and coalition assets, 124 ballistic, cruise and anti-ship missiles, plus 340. Shahed 136 loitering munitions. Total 464 systems. Ballistic missiles intercepted, 4 of 4 dhow al-Fiqar, 28 of 31 Fateh 313, 90.3% rate. Anti-ship missiles intercepted, 46 of 47 Noor and Ghader. Cruise missiles intercepted, 9 of 14 Quds, 3. 28 of 28 Soumar, combined 80.4% rate. Drone swarm intercepted, 286 of 340, Shahed 136, 84.1% rate. Overall intercept and neutralization rate across all 464 systems, 87.7%. Physical impacts on defended installations, NSA Bahrain, 2 cruise missile impacts, 31 Shahed impacts. Fuel point non-operational. Maintenance facility damaged. Pier section structurally compromised. Command facilities and 5th Fleet Operations Center intact and fully operational throughout. Al-Udeid fuel farm, 6 Shahed impacts, 2 of 7 fuel lines disabled. Strike operations continuing at 71% throughput. USS Laboon, 1 Ghader anti-ship missile impact, 2 compartments flooded, contained. Combat capable at reduced speed. Al-Udeid outer perimeter. 3 Fateh 313 impacts, no runway contact. Personnel, 14 U.S. service members injured across all impact locations. None assessed as life-threatening. 0 fatalities from direct weapons impact on military installations. Counter-strike munitions deployed. 72 Tomahawk cruise missiles. 48 JASSM-ER. 34 JDAM and precision munitions. 2 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. 28 AARGM-ER. Total counter-strike cost, approximately $1.7 billion. Operational total, including interceptors across 90-minute engagement, $2.6 billion. Houthi coastal launch infrastructure. All 6 QUDs. 3 launch sites confirmed engaged. 5 of 6 confirmed inoperable. IRGC coastal anti-ship missile infrastructure at JASSM and Bandar Abbas. 14 of 17 catalogued positions engaged and assessed as neutralized. IRGC Shahed launch positions. 9 of 12 identified launch sites engaged. USS Laboon, underway, combat capable, proceeding for at-sea assessment. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, fully operational, all aircraft combat effective, VLS capacity reduced to 62% of pre-engagement load across all 4 escorts. NSA Bahrain, operational continuity maintained throughout. 5th Fleet Command Authority, uninterrupted. The combined Houthi-IRGC package had been the most geometrically complex threat the U.S. Navy had faced in the post-1945 era. 4 simultaneous threat streams, 3 geographic origins, 6 weapon categories, coordinated against targets across a 1,400-kilometer operational footprint. The exchange ratio across the conventional missile package strongly favored the defense. The Shahed swarm had demonstrated the asymmetric mathematics of the drone threat category in a way that no previous engagement had. 340 systems at $20,000 each, requiring a response architecture that cost 2 orders of magnitude more per intercept to field. The exchange ratio problem would not be solved by this engagement. It would be studied, modeled, and redesigned around. The directed energy systems had functioned. Their magazine was unlimited. The analysis would begin tomorrow. Tonight, the fleet was still there. The command network was intact. The 87.7% intercept rate across 464 systems had held the line that mattered. 1 destroyer had been hit and remained underway. The operations center at NSA Bahrain had processed 90 minutes of multi-domain engagement without interruption. The combined package had found the seam between cost and volume. The network had found the seam between depth and geometry. Neither finding was conclusive. The analysis would continue. So would the fleet.